we've got a river running through our workshop.
Kumeu, West Auckland.
This is real bad.
In 3 years, it experienced its 3 biggest floods.
Look, I've been here 28 years in the workshop and this is the worst we've had.
Council now says the town can't be protected.
It's not pleasant to form a community that you have no solution for them, I'll be honest.
But residents do have a plan. Move the town to higher ground.
We're saying we need a planned migration.
The question is, who pays? Welcome to the NBR Podcast. I'm your host, Simon Shepherd. How to manage Kiwis' retreat from climate change? A complex question, being grappled with by government, councils, insurance companies, and of course, those affected. Like the residents of Kumeu-Huapai, a West Auckland rural town in wine and strawberry country, and a town that can no longer cope with intensifying rainfall.
There's been quite significant effect, both financial and emotional. Businesses have struggled because the financial impact on them in covering things outside insurance have been quite enormous. The emotional effects of disappointment, grief have flowed on to family.
Graham McIntyre is a long-time local real estate agent and property manager. He is also part of a community group called Future Kumeu.
We find that insurance companies have no stamina for flood risk.
Yeah.
Because of the cost to them is significant, and they can't mitigate it, they can't minimise it. So because of these factors, businesses have to make a decision.
Right.
And that decision is fight or flight.
Businesses are telling you that, is there an insurance retreat? I mean, they would have had insurance maybe a couple of years ago. Do they have it now?
No.
They don't have it now.
No, it's gone.
So how can you continue operating with the knowledge that another event may come along and you're not covered?
That's what people are navigating with at the present time.
Have you seen businesses go because of the 2 recent or 3 recent events?
Yeah, we've seen businesses leave Kumeu because they can't get insurance cover. We've also seen businesses burnt down and not being able to be rebuilt because the council have overlaid a higher flood map through the whole Kumeu area, which means that if something happens to a building, the floor level now needs to be 2 metres higher than it currently is, which makes it impossible for some businesses to actually operate that way because they need to have vehicle access.
Kumeu-Huapai is busy. So busy, there's a plan to build a rapid transit corridor through the current town. There's also a long-term plan to move the town centre to a nice spot down by the Kumeu riverbank, protected by new works on a floodway. So we asked Graham McIntyre to take us to the spot where the recent floods hit hardest. It was the same place. Tell me where we're standing right now.
So we are principally ground zero as to where the town centre would be and in regards to where the flood levels are the highest within Kumeu.
All right, how high do they come through?
So we're talking 1.5 to 2 metres through this area.
Right.
The Kumeu River is just
just over there?
500 metres.
And what kind of businesses are around here?
Oh, we're talking about gyms, construction, heavy construction, automotive repair, etc.
Yeah.
So you're talking quite significant assets and quite significant money tied up in vehicles and gym equipment and other bits and pieces.
And so these people have to constantly think about what may happen?
Yeah, if we have a deluge event, I know that the car painter repairer has a system in place to try and get all the cars out of here as soon as they possibly can. The gym, I know, has got a plan to relocate all their gym equipment so that it doesn't flood. I think both are in a position that the flood insurance that they currently hold isn't going to cover their assets.
The Kumeu-Huapai community is prone to flooding because it sits in an extremely large river catchment. Its long flood history dates back to 1926 when the local post office went under. Major flooding is usually measured as a 1 in 100 year event. That used to mean 150 millimetres of rain in a 24-hour period. No longer.
It's 60% larger than we thought.
60% larger.
That's that sort of figure.
Nick Vigar is Head of Planning at Auckland Council's Healthy Waters, the department charged with planning for and mitigating stormwater.
We've gone from a scenario where 25 years ago we thought 150 mils was it.
Mm-hmm.
Now we think it's 250, and our climate change projections are another third on top of that.
A third on top of that?
Yeah. And so you can sort of understand that in our models there's a lot more water. I think the best indicator, a nice bit of evidence, is we've had a flow gauge at Waimoku, just downstream of Kumeu, since 1971.
Yeah.
Up till 2021, the biggest event on record was in 1979, the 1979 Kumeu floods. And so now we've had 3 events that are all well bigger than that.
Those 3 events were the 2021 floods and then 2 floods a month apart in January and February 2023. This has probably had a major effect in terms of the level of flooding on residential homes and businesses in that area.
Absolutely. Yeah, with that new understanding comes a whole lot more people who thought they had no issues and who do. There were probably somewhere around 350 properties that flooded in the 27th of January event. Roughly 50-50 commercial and residential.
Right.
So that's current. That's what we understand the kind of current risk to be.
Yep.
With our climate change projections on top of that, it's another third again. So
another third of homes and businesses.
Roughly, it gets us probably our projections are with those 3.8 degrees of climate change, which is current council policy.
Yep.
That number's probably closer to 500 properties.
So Healthy Waters through council has looked at 3 options to try and mitigate the amount of water that comes through Kumeu and Huapai catchment. And so the first one was you considered widening the floodway at a projected cost of $573 million, $500 million.
Broadly, that option was one that's been on the table since before Auckland Council amalgamated. The floodway idea was sort of baked into the idea that eventually you could reduce the flood risk and have a new town centre at that eastern end of Kumeu, but it was contingent on building the floodway. We designed one, and as you say, it's extremely expensive. In terms of properties that benefit, you're talking about spending $5 million a property or something.
$5 million a property.
Yeah. And so
so was it the cost that stopped it, or the fact that it just didn't work?
So for that particular option, I think it's a cost benefit thing. Very, very clearly, you can't go spending that sort of money on individual properties, and that was pretty straightforward.
Okay.
So then we came back to look at some alternative options.
Yep.
One of those was effectively a massive pipeline through to the Upper Waitemata Harbour.
Right, so this is a tunnel, like a
tunnel.
Stormwater tunnel, a massive
stormwater tunnel.
How long?
Nearly 2 kilometres.
2 kilometres. Underneath the town?
No, underneath. So this would go from sort of a little bit upstream of Kumeu and would go sideways out of the catchment to the Upper Waitemata Harbour.
Okay.
You wouldn't see it. It would be a piece of infrastructure roughly the same size as Watercare's Central Interceptor. So that's a 4.5 metre diameter tunnel, and we actually used their pricing to get an idea of our pricing. So we have a good... So
for people who don't understand what outside of Auckland what the Interceptor tunnel is, it's a massive wastewater pipe being built under Auckland right now.
Yeah, it's a wastewater tunnel that really future-proofs a good chunk of central Auckland. Now, there's all sorts of options, all sorts of issues around consentability of something like that, of pushing water. But even apart from that, it has better economics than the floodway.
$295 million.
Yeah, you're still spending a few $1 million a property, so it's not fantastic, but it's better than the floodway, and it benefits a few more properties than the floodway because it's upstream a little bit further. But again, it has a real issue that you now have a significant issue if you ever get blockage of that tunnel. So now you're effectively creating a piece of infrastructure that you have to manage the inlet to very carefully forever and a day.
If that ever got blocked, what would happen?
Well, it's important to understand the upper part of the Kumeu catchment is rural and it routinely has trees and large debris floating down. And so it's no small thing to protect the inlet of a 3 to 5 metre diameter tunnel. And then I guess the third option we looked at is really basically building a dam further up in the catchment to hold back water during the flood and release it afterwards.
So at 163 million, that's cheaper.
Oh, it's much better economics. Of all the options, you're talking now about something that in terms of the properties it's benefiting is probably not much more than $500,000 a property, which is still not fantastic, but it's much more in keeping. But again, it has this real, the fundamental flaw to that is again around residual risk. What you're doing is you're taking a bet on what the size of that event is going to be, right? You're building something for this nominal 100-year event that we understand and a benefit. We now know rain's going to fall as it's going to fall. We used to have a conception of what the 100-year event is. We have a new one. There's nothing to say we won't have another new one in 12 months' time.
That's right.
And so the problem is you draw a line in the sand and we say we're going to build a big dam, which is, we're talking about something around about 1,000 Olympic swimming pools in terms of volume, and we're going to say that's what we think is enough to protect downstream. But the problem is that if we get a bigger event, or if the outlet to that dam fails and it overtops, then all those properties downstream of them will flood. Yeah. And so it's a residual risk argument. And I guess worse than that is probably the redevelopment. So if we put a dam in higher up in the catchment, effectively we're going to shrink the floodplain downstream and encourage redevelopment.
So people are going to build downstream.
If they're private plan changes, people are within their rights to develop up to the floodplain.
Wow.
And so now we have an issue where potentially you're putting in a dam and you're actually increasing the risk by getting more intensification.
So none of those three options seem to be worthwhile.
No,
both cost effective or in terms of actually, solving the problem.
No, I don't feel like I can recommend any of those options.
No.
And that's unfortunate because we had a community that really was keen to hear that there was an infrastructure solution.
You presented at the meeting to the community. What was that like?
It's not pleasant to inform a community that you have no solution for them, I'll be honest.
You were at that meeting. How was that received?
Not well.
They're not really presenting a future option then, are they?
No. Their future option is Kumeu will not be viable.
But Graham McIntyre and his group Future Kumeu do have a plan. They want to migrate the town centre to higher ground.
So we are standing right in the area that we're proposing the new Kumeu town centre.
Right.
It is greenfields, it is historic orchards, and it's prime for development. It would be a council-private partnership that these landowners, the majority, are happy to invest in developing with council. So
these landowners are on board with the idea?
Yes.
Right. And why would they want to give up this land?
It's not commercially viable. It was orchards back in the day, but today the varieties have all changed. The ability to make money out of these orchards has gone. So in essence, most of it has now become land bank, either land bank for future urban or future development, or just
future town centre. Sounds
future
good.
Future town centre.
How much land are we talking about here?
We've got about 40 hectares
that
are
big
within
enough?
this area.
Is that big enough?
Absolutely.
Who would pay to move the town of Kumeu?
Ultimately, it's a council private partnership project. Where we know we've got private owners that are prepared to invest. I would imagine council need to invest, and it would need to have a planned progression to its development.
We're talking decades though, aren't we?
Oh, we're talking the next 10 to 20 years.
What's facing Kumeu is facing other parts of New Zealand. This year, the government is planning to introduce legislation on climate adaptation, which includes managed retreat. and could stipulate who pays what. It's complex and time-consuming. And while we wait, there was a warning from former Climate Change Minister James Shaw at a recent insurance industry conference. He said the insurance industry, would have to do the heavy lifting. And listening to that was Chairman of Tower Insurance, Michael Stiasny.
People like me who believe in democracy are continually frustrated by the lack of leadership provided by the government.
Right.
And the message was that ain't going to change. So therefore, we as insurers need to be signalling very, very clearly to every person in New Zealand, this is a good place to build a house, this is a bad place to build a house, and there are massive risks by building in the wrong place. And by charging or creating a price issue around it, we're helping get those messages across. And sooner or later, central and local government will need to step in to help get those boundaries very clear.
Isn't it a shame that the insurance industry has to lead with risk-based pricing and that it doesn't come from our elected representatives?
That is a real big shame, but let's be totally frank, these are really big issues. You can't say to someone in Kumeu or take Westport or Greymouth, we really don't think this is a good place to have a town, so we are going to move you and you might have to help pay for that. That takes leadership. It takes a determination that it's very hard for a politician to do when they wish to be re-elected in a 3 or 4 year cycle.
I can't swim, so for me it was like, this is how I die.
Let's go back to the Auckland floods in 2023.
Yesterday was Auckland's wettest day on record.
7,000 homes affected, 500 buyouts so far.
There are so many other houses that also have damage.
But that hasn't stopped 3,799 new homes being consented in hazard zones since January 2023. Auckland Council says applicants have to show risks like flooding can be avoided or managed. It also says new controls are being looked at. But this kind of building, says the insurance industry, is dumb.
I think we're doing the same thing again. It's unfortunate. We need to see a stronger position taken by local and central government that we are not doing this again, because the insurance companies, which are private or owned by the public, are not the people who are going to pay for these disasters.
Yep. Okay. So is it not enough of an incentive, the fact that insurance companies are just not going to cover these places? I mean, nobody's going to cover it. So why would you do it?
So we all appreciate it isn't enough.
Right.
If you want to buy your first house, you're struggling to meet that cost, and the developer says, I'm selling it to you for $700,000, I will make some form of insurance arrangement for you, I will give you this incentive so you don't need to worry about the bank who has now said they're not going to lend you the money, etc. You end up with the same people ending up living in a floodplain and disaster will occur. So it requires a firm but fair hand. You actually have to say floodplains, no one can live there because there are inherent problems we cannot fix.
It's part of the problem that we have a public insurance agency, like it's now called the Natural Hazards Agency. And so we pay into that and it gives out coverage up to a certain level and no questions asked about risk.
And there is a paper out from Treasury now saying that they want to increase it. So it goes against, in my view, everything we're trying to do, which risk-based pricing is helping people appreciate the risks they are under by living in the wrong place. And if you now put in a blanket sum at the bottom, you're taking away that variability and hence hiding the transparency that comes from risk-based pricing being more expensive for those which have greater risk.
Yep.
So in my view, it's a no-win.
Yep.
I also don't think it's appropriate to have another regulator or another government agency, handing out that money. It would be a lot better to find a way of saying to the private insurers, we will cover a certain percentage at the bottom rather than a fixed sum, and you can manage it, because we actually are better at managing risk and disaster than the old EQC.
Right. But what about the people that you just mentioned and those who cannot afford insurance? Is that situation that we have with the former EQC a way of giving some form of equitable treatment across the board for people who can't afford insurance?
So what we're doing is saying you and I and every other New Zealander who pays tax is going to help those people who continually get an opportunity to buy in an area where they should not be living.
So it doesn't disincentivise that.
We're perpetuating the continual problem, which is there are certain parts of this country where you shouldn't live, full stop.
Michael Stiasny has thrown out a challenge for insurance companies to develop one online platform where all the agreed risks for a property are publicly available, so we stop buying or building in dumb places. That doesn't help the people of Kumeu. The risks increased after many of them moved there, so much so that they will perhaps have to leave town.
The problem that we have is that Kumeu won't exist in 10 to 20 years. Once we have another 2 or 3 floods running through Kumeu, people won't be able to survive in that environment. The weather patterns are getting worse, they're not getting better. So why would we stay? Because we have to invest in our building and in our future.
Yep.
So it is the perfect storm that needs to be discussed and needs a solution.
And that wraps up this episode of the NBR Podcast. Thanks to content producers Jake Latham and Joseph Hisayasu. And links to social media clips used are in the description. I'm Simon Shepherd. We'll catch you next time.